Hello, General Biology, and welcome to the third screencast in Section 3.4 in our Chapter 3 series. And we had ended the other one talking about the carbon cycle, and we weren't quite finished with all of the activities of the carbon cycle. I was talking about the different ways that it could be released. We were looking at the geological forces. When organisms die, they decompose and they break down their bodies and they release that into the environment. We talked about it being released in the form of carbon dioxide gas by respiration. I mentioned fossil fuels and carbon contained in the rocks and released as it erodes. Put up into the atmosphere by volcanic activity and human activity and the burning of fossil fuels, clearing and the burning of forest. All of these are ways of putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And we saw the whole carbon cycle and we went through all of that. But there are a lot of important questions that remain about the carbon cycle. We know how it functions. But what we don't know is how much carbon can be put through the system. Right now in our history, because there are 7 billion people, yes, I said 7 billion people on the planet, we change and we alter the face of the earth more than any other species have in our history. And since we're cutting down forests, we're clear cutting, and we're plowing under prairies, and we're eliminating and reducing the plants that recycle this carbon. We're not exactly sure how much our atmosphere can actually hold. Think of it this way. You have a glass and you filled your glass with water and it's all the way filled to the top. Okay, that's where we are with carbon right now. What's going to happen if we pour a little bit more water into that glass? It's all going to spill over. And that's what we're concerned about. Are we at the point where our trees are full? They can't hold anymore. I mentioned Biosphere 2 to you, and they're doing testing right now, and what they're seeing is that the plants will actually shut down and they'll stop taking in carbon dioxide because they have so much of it. And it'll go into the soil. Our oceans are holding a lot of the carbon dioxide as well. And what isn't being held, and we're going to talk about this in a later chapter, is it's going up into our atmosphere and it's becoming part of our greenhouse gases. And what it's doing is it's thickening that blanket of gases. And that might not seem like any problem at all because the atmosphere is like way far away, but it is, because just think, you're laying in bed and I put a sheet on you. Sheet's not too warm. That's our regular atmospheric gases that are there. Then I throw a quilt on top of you. I thicken it up. It's going to be a little bit warmer. It could get a little bit toasty under those covers. But what happens if I throw yet another quilt, the feather down quilt on top of you? And it's going to get a lot warmer and a lot warmer. And that's what's happening. We're increasing that blanket, those greenhouse gases, that blanket, and it's causing the earth to be warmer. Air that would normally go further up to cool down isn't able to go up as high to cool down, and it's coming back down warmer. So how is our ecosystem going to respond to those changes in atmospheric carbon dioxide? We are at the highest level that we have ever seen in the history of the Earth. And the way that we can tell how high the levels were in geological history is by drilling and getting core samples. And we can get core samples from the bottom of the ocean. We can get core samples from the middle of a field. We can get core samples from the polar ice caps. And what those core samples are telling us is that there's been carbon dioxide in the atmosphere before. It's been high, but it's something like 3 times, 4 times higher than it's ever been in any of those core samples. So that's a big concern that we have to watch out for the carbon cycle. Okay, the next cycle is the nitrogen cycle, and the nitrogen cycle is a little bit more complicated. When you actually see the picture, you're going to go like, wow, I don't get this. But hopefully I'll be able to explain it to you where you will get it. Again, we'll watch this video in class. But nitrogen is important, as I already said, because it is an atom, a molecule that is found in nucleic acids. It is important in combining to form RNA and DNA, which we know is our genetic information, our heredity. It helps to form that energy molecule ATP. It's found in the adenosine of that ATP, so it's significant in there. Nitrogen is also part of our amino groups, if you remember that from chapter 2, and hopefully you're making those connections. And we know that amino groups are really important in making proteins. And we know that proteins have many functions in helping the organism to survive. So we require that nitrogen. And nitrogen does have an atmospheric stage. It is in the form of nitrogen gas, and nitrogen gas by itself we can't take in. Again, it's toxic, so we have to be able to obtain it in some other way, and we obtain it within the plants and the animals that we eat. So we do have a biological cycle of the nitrogen cycle, where it does come from the atmosphere and it is converted by bacteria and microscopic organisms into ammonia. Ammonia would be considered what we find in fertilizer. So when it joins with hydrogen and is NH3, that would be kind of like the waste products from a cow that are used as fertilizer on a field. And the bacteria is going to help break that ammonia down and attach that ammonia to oxygens. If it attaches it to 2 oxygens, then we get one type of compound, and if it attaches to 3 oxygens, we get another type of compound, and we call them nitrates and nitrites. And as nitrites and nitrates, they're then able to be picked up by the plants and used by the plants in order to produce the food. Okay, so we need bacteria that is going to work on that, and we'll talk about those processes in more detail. Animals as well will be the biological part that will fix the atmospheric nitrogen, and then we have the human part again, and then the physical and the chemical, like the lightning that is going to happen, that helps to fix this process. So let's take a look at nitrogen. Nitrogen makes up about 78% of the Earth's atmosphere, so it's really significant in the atmosphere. When we see the nitrogen cycle, and here's where I said it gets a little bit complicated, and I liked this diagram because it does simplify it a lot more. Nitrogen is in the atmosphere, and the way it's going to get into our plants so that the animals can eat it is it's going to be collected by bacteria, and this bacteria is going to be called nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And this bacteria lives at the roots of plants that are called legumes. So those are like your bean plants, and you can see these are like peas or green beans hanging down. And it actually takes that nitrogen and it attaches, when it says nitrogen fixing, that's nitrogen fixation. And that means that it attaches it to hydrogen. Okay, So it will attach it to that hydrogen so that it can be used. So that's what that nitrogen fixing bacteria does. So when we get it attached to the hydrogen, it becomes ammonia. And now other types of bacteria called nitrifying bacteria will then take that nitrogen and it will attach it to oxygen. If it's only attached to 2 oxygens, it's called a nitrite. If it is attached to 3 oxygen, it's called a nitrate. So this nitrifying bacteria is going to be able to chemically change that nitrogen, or chemically combine, I shouldn't say change, recombine that nitrogen with the oxygen so that now as nitrates and nitrites, these are our fertilizers, they can go and be picked up by the root systems of the plants. And now the plants are going to have the nitrogen inside of them, and animals like rabbits and humans can eat the plants and get that nitrogen. Now there's 2 other things that will help put nitrogen in the soil, and decomposition is one of those. Decomposition will break down the components within organisms and turn that into ammonia as well. And that's what's happening within the feces of the cow manure that we use as fertilizers. Another term that you need to know is something called denitrifying or denitrification. And denitrification is pulling that nitrogen off of the oxygens. It's removing it from the oxygens and making nitrogen, just plain old nitrogen again, so that it continues the cycle. All right, so those are the processes of the nitrogen cycle. It's a little bit more complicated. We've got nitrogen fixing bacteria called nitrogen fixation that actually will take the nitrogen and help attach it to the roots. Some of that will convert it into ammonia so that other nitrifying bacteria can change it into nitrites and nitrates, and then the plants can assimilate that and use it. Denitrifying bacteria, just other kinds of bacteria, will also break it apart from that oxygen and return it to nitrogen in the atmosphere. Okay, so let's go through this, and I'm just going to repeat this and read it to you, but this is what's happening. So nitrogen-containing substances such as ammonia, nitrate ions, and nitrite ions are found in the soil. They come from the waste that are produced by many organisms and in dead organic matter. The dissolved nitrogen also exists in forms in the ocean as well, and other large water bodies. Nitrogen gas is the most abundant form of nitrogen gas on Earth, but only certain types of bacteria that live in the soil and on the roots of legumes, bean plants, can use this form directly. And the bacteria will actually convert the nitrogen gas into ammonia in that process known as nitrification, nitrogen fixation, that we mentioned. The other soil bacteria then can convert the nitrogen gas into nitrates and nitrites that the primary producers are going to use to make their proteins and nucleic acids and ATP. The consumers are going to eat the producers and reuse the nitrogen to make their own nitrogen-containing compounds. Notice we have an atmospheric stage in this, so carbon and nitrogen have an atmospheric stage. The decomposers are going to release the nitrogen from the waste and the dead organisms as ammonia and as nitrates and nitrites so that the producers can take them up as well. So decomposers help in this process. And then other soil bacteria are going to obtain their energy from the nitrates into nitrogen gas when they release it into the atmosphere by a process called denitrification. Okay, there's a small amount of nitrogen gas that's converted into usable forms by lightning, and this is known as atmospheric nitrogen fixation. We're going to stop there. We're running out of time. We'll pick up and conclude on nitrogen in the next screencast.